It's 1966, and inside Abbey Road Studios, chaos is unfolding. The Beatles, usually in sync, are struggling to capture a sound that feels right. A guitar screeches out of tune. Its sharp, distorted tone fills the room, cutting through the otherwise quiet atmosphere. Paul McCartney looks up, his eyes tired, his frustration palpable. Across the room, John Lennon's fingers stop mid-air, unsure whether to laugh or curse. George Harrison, fumbling with his guitar, hits a chord that, to the untrained ear, sounds completely offbeat. But then something unexpected happens. Paul's eyes widen. John nods, a knowing grin spreading across his face. It wasn't a mistake. It was the moment that would change everything. What if it was this very mistake that made their music timeless? Could something so flawed truly be the key to their success? In the summer of 1966, the Beatles were facing a struggle they had never quite encountered before. Despite their overwhelming success, there was an undeniable sense of fatigue in the air. The pressure was mounting, not just from their adoring fans, but from the high standards they had set for themselves. They had already revolutionized music and culture with their earlier albums, but now something was off. The band was in Abbey Road Studios, working on a new track, but no matter what they tried, the song just wasn't coming together. For the first time in their career, they were struggling to produce something that felt truly inspired. The energy that had previously flowed effortlessly in the studio was nowhere to be found. Each attempt seemed to fall short. Tensions ran high, and the clock was ticking. It was during one of these frustrating moments that George Harrison, feeling the weight of the pressure, picked up his guitar and tried a new approach. He strummed a chord, and it was immediately clear that it was wrong. The guitar didn't resonate with the melody, and the sound that filled the studio was harsh and discordant. A wrong note, an accidental mistake, the kind that could derail any other band. But for the Beatles, this was no ordinary error. They paused, looking at each other, unsure whether to move on or to continue experimenting. Instead of cutting the take, as most musicians would have done, they decided to press on. George, slightly embarrassed, continued playing, but this time, something unexpected happened. The mistake didn't feel like a failure. It felt like a spark. There was something in the rough, imperfect tone that intrigued them. John Lennon and Paul McCartney, always the ones pushing the creative boundaries, began to brainstorm. They discussed how they could turn the distorted sound into something purposeful, something that could become the heart of the song. They didn't see the mistake as a flaw. They saw it as an opportunity. The idea of embracing imperfection wasn't new to the Beatles. Over the years, they had been known for bending the rules and rejecting the polished, formulaic structures that dominated popular music. But now, this accidental sound would become the cornerstone of something even more groundbreaking. Transition. But that wasn't the whole story. What happened next would completely change the direction of their music. What started as a mistake, a simple out-of-tune guitar chord, soon began to take on a life of its own. The Beatles weren't ones to shy away from experimentation, but this was different. This was something raw, unpolished, and in some ways messy. And yet, it was exactly what they needed to push the boundaries of their sound. John Lennon and Paul McCartney, inspired by the accidental sound, immediately began to think about how they could build on it. Instead of shying away from the flaw, They leaned into it. Paul McCartney, ever the innovator in the studio, began experimenting with various effects, manipulating the distortion to bring out the harshness and energy that the mistake had created. They dialed in reverb, delay, and other effects to make the mistake feel purposeful. At first, the sound was jarring. The guitar was harsh and seemed completely out of sync with the rest of the track. But then they started layering it. The band began adding more tracks, building on the sound with rhythm guitar, bass, and percussion. Each layer added a new dimension to the original mistake, transforming it from something discordant into something dynamic and unexpected. As they continued to experiment, the rawness of the sound began to feel like an integral part of the track. It wasn't about making everything perfect. It was about embracing the imperfect and using it to create something new. The studio became a playground for the band, a place where the usual rules of songwriting and production were thrown out the window. This approach to music wasn't just about creating a new sound. It was a reflection of the band's evolving artistic philosophy. The Beatles had always been ahead of their time, but this moment marked a clear shift. They were no longer just a pop band. They were innovators, pushing the boundaries of what music could be. They were willing to embrace the unexpected, to find beauty in what others might have considered mistakes. The song, with its unrefined, distorted guitar, started to take shape as one of the most groundbreaking tracks of their career. What had been a small error now became the song's defining feature. But was it truly an accident? Or was this moment of spontaneity the spark of genius they had been searching for all along? The real magic happened when they began pushing the limits of their own sound. As the Beatles dove deeper into the recording process, it became clear that the song was no longer just about the track itself. It was about the experience of creating it. The once dominant idea of perfectly polished pop songs was replaced with something that felt more authentic, more raw. The band began to embrace imperfections in ways they never had before. The studio became an extension of their creative minds. It wasn't just a place to record. It was a laboratory for innovation. The distorted off-key guitar became more than just a fluke. It became a part of the band's evolving sound. John, Paul, George, and Ringo were now working in harmony, not just with their instruments, but with the technology around them. Paul McCartney, in particular, was instrumental in experimenting with studio techniques that would later become signature elements of the Beatles' later work. They began using innovative effects like tape loops, backwards recording, and even unconventional instruments to layer the track in a way that had never been done before. The band played with the notion of texture in music. They weren't just creating melodies, they were sculpting sound. The previously imperfect, jarring guitar now became the anchor of the track, its distorted notes reverberating through the speakers in a way that was both haunting and captivating. As the song started to take shape, the Beatles realized they weren't just crafting a song, they were crafting a moment. They were creating something that would feel timeless. What had started as a mistake was now the cornerstone of a track that would define a generation. The more they worked on it, the more it became clear that this song wasn't just another Beatles hit. It was a statement, a declaration that music could be something different, something more expressive. By embracing their mistakes, they had found a new form of artistic freedom. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about capturing raw energy, emotion, and the spontaneity of creation. But they had no idea just how powerful it would be, how this track would soon become an anthem, an instant classic, and the start of a new era in music. When the song was finally released, no one could have predicted the seismic impact it would have on the music industry. It wasn't just a hit, it was a revolution. The track became a defining moment in the Beatles' career, not just because of its success, but because of the way it marked a shift in their musical identity. The Beatles were no longer the Fab Four churning out catchy pop songs. They had transformed into musical visionaries, reshaping the landscape of rock and roll. The song was groundbreaking in many ways. Its experimental sound, with its raw, distorted guitar and unpolished energy, was unlike anything that had been heard on the radio before. It captured the sense of rebellion and creative freedom that was sweeping through the 1960s, and it became the anthem of a generation. For the Beatles, this was more than just a musical achievement. It was a reflection of their evolving approach to art. They had embraced imperfection, not just in their sound, but in their approach to the music-making process itself. The studio had become a canvas, and every recording session was a new opportunity to break the rules, to explore and to push the boundaries of what was possible. The success of the song marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Beatles. They had moved beyond the confines of traditional pop music and had entered a new era of experimentation and artistic expression. They were now free to explore new sounds, new techniques, and new ideas without worrying about fitting into the mold of what a pop song should be. The song's impact was felt beyond just the Beatles. It influenced countless artists who would go on to embrace the idea of imperfection and experimentation in their own work. The song became a touchstone for musicians, proving that it was okay to take risks, to fail, and to embrace the unexpected. But while the song would go on to redefine their legacy, was the initial mistake the only reason it became so iconic? Or did something deeper, something even more unexpected, fuel its success? The release of this song marked more than just a turning point for the Beatles. It marked a cultural revolution. The track wasn't just another chart topper, it was an anthem for a generation that had grown weary of traditional conventions. It captured the spirit of the times, rebellious, unrefined, and utterly original. As it soared up the charts, the song's influence spread far beyond music. It resonated with a generation that was ready for change, ready for something new. It reflected the ethos of the 1960s, an era that was defined by its rejection of old norms and its embrace of experimentation. The song became a symbol of artistic freedom and creative risk-taking, inspiring countless artists to step outside the boundaries of what was expected and to create something truly their own. In the years that followed, the song's legacy only grew. It became one of the Beatles' most iconic tracks, covered by hundreds of artists and featured in countless movies, TV shows, and documentaries. Its influence extended far beyond music. It became a cultural touchstone, a defining moment in the history of popular culture. For the Beatles, the success of the song wasn't just about chart performance or record sales. It was about the way it changed the conversation around music. It wasn't about perfection. It was about authenticity. The song proved that music didn't have to be flawless to be meaningful. It had to be honest, raw, and true to the artist's vision. The Beatles had always been ahead of their time, but this track marked a turning point in their career. It signified their transition from pop icons to musical pioneers, and in the process, they redefined what it meant to be an artist in the modern world. But what if the world had never heard this track? What if they hadn't turned a mistake into a masterpiece? As the song became an enduring cultural phenomenon, some fans began to entertain the idea that there was something almost supernatural about its creation. There were whispers among Beatles devotees that the song's origins were not just a product of experimentation, but rather a manifestation of something greater, something beyond the band's control. Some speculated that the accidental guitar chord, so offbeat and imperfect, was more than just a mistake. It was a sign, a cosmic fluke that led to the creation of a masterpiece. Some conspiracy theorists even argued that the universe had conspired to create this track, suggesting that the accidental chord was meant to happen. The very imperfections that the band embraced were thought to be the work of fate, and fans found magic in the idea that something so out of sync could produce such harmony. While these theories are fascinating, the truth behind the song's creation is likely far more grounded. The Beatles were indeed innovators who knew how to push the boundaries of their craft. They took risks, experimented, and embraced mistakes. But they were also master musicians with a keen understanding of sound and production. The idea that the song's creation was a matter of fate might be romantic, but the reality is that the Beatles' success was due to their willingness to take chances and break the rules. Whether it was fate, chance, or creative genius, one thing is certain: the song's success was no accident. It was the result of bold, innovative thinking, and its influence continues to this day. This mistake was only one of many moments in which the Beatles defied expectations and created something entirely new. Their approach to music was one of constant reinvention. They weren't interested in following trends. They wanted to create them. The Beatles revolutionized the recording process, using the studio not just as a place to capture music, but as a creative tool in and of itself. They experimented with new instruments, new sounds, and new recording techniques, constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible in music. The mistake that led to this groundbreaking song was just one example of how the band was willing to embrace the unexpected, to turn failure into opportunity. The Beatles' willingness to take risks, to explore the unknown, and to embrace imperfection was at the heart of their success. Their innovation didn't just change the way music was made, it changed the way the world thought about art. The Beatles showed that creativity didn't have to be neat, polished, or perfect. It just had to be real. But if this was the breakthrough, what would happen next? Could the Beatles top themselves once again? What seemed like an accidental flaw, the out-of-tune chord, ended up being a defining moment in music history. The Beatles' ability to turn a seemingly disastrous moment into a creative breakthrough shows how their genius was rooted in their willingness to embrace imperfection. This song didn't just change the course of the Beatles' career, it changed the course of music itself. The mistake wasn't a failure, it was the birth of a new era of sound. A moment where innovation met accident, and together, they changed the world. The Beatles' story is a testament to the power of embracing the unexpected, of turning challenges into triumphs. It's a reminder that creativity is not just about being perfect. It's about being bold, being willing to fail, and being ready to make something beautiful from the chaos. What would have happened if they hadn't embraced that mistake? Would they still have become the legends they are today? Or was it this very moment of imperfection that made them unstoppable?